Okay, so real quick, I want to show you the difference between a subject and a thesis. If we can design a good thesis, we can design a good lesson, and we'll know how to design that lesson, and the students will know what the lesson is about. So let's talk about it. What's the difference between a subject and a thesis? A subject is a person or a thing that's being discussed, described, or dealt with. It's the thing that we're talking about. Now, that's a little bit different than the thesis. A thesis is the interpretation of the subject. It's not the subject itself, it's the interpretation of what is being discussed. So again, a subject is the thing that's being discussed, and the thesis is what we're having to say about the subject. So let's get an example here. Let's say that we were writing a paper or teaching a lesson on Nazi soldiers. There's a lot of things that we could say about a Nazi soldier. So here's just two, for example. Let's say Nazi soldiers are not criminals, their commanders are. So we want to try to argue that Nazi soldiers aren't really supposed to be held responsible for what they did. The commanders should be. Something you could argue. Another thing is that Nazi soldiers ought to be forgiven for their crimes. This up here is the thesis. And once you've designed a thesis, come up with a thesis, what you want to say about the subject, you have to prove it to be true. And that's where your lesson or your paper comes into play. If you can prove to somebody that this is true, you've got yourself a good lesson or a good paper, and that's what you fill out the rest of your paper or the rest of the time in class trying to do, showing everybody that your thesis about your subject is true. So here we go. Here's a quick review. A thesis is not the subject. It is an interpretation of the subject. It's a statement that must be proved, and it tells the readers what the paper's about. Another way of saying that for our circumstance is that it tells the student what the lesson is all about. So once you get a thesis, you can design your lesson around it, what you want to say about the subject. And then when you come into class, it's one of the first things that you tell the class. Hey, today we're going to be talking about this subject and this specific thing about the subject, your thesis. And everybody knows what's going on in the class, and it becomes much more focused. That's how they get a good takeaway.